Hi, everyone. It's Dr. Johnston. It's time for another featured crime analysis. As you might remember, in episode 15, we covered the case of Ben Field, who was a psychopathic church leader who used his victims' faith to manipulate and exploit them. Unfortunately, stories of predatory religious leaders who take advantage of their trusting followers to sexually abuse them or steal from them are not uncommon. And these stories are especially heartbreaking when they involve the abuse of children. Sometimes, though, there is a happy ending, at least in terms of justice being served. Today's featured crime analysis is about two courageous young women who spoke up to put their perpetrator behind bars. So here's the backdrop. In October of 2015, a former pastor of the Richmond Outreach Center named Geronimo Aguilar was sentenced to 40 years in prison for sexually abusing children. Aguilar, who is known locally as Pastor G, began sexually abusing two sisters when they were just 11 and 13 years old. These girls, who are now women, spoke to me about their experiences and how they found the courage to speak up. This is their story.
I met Geronimo when we were very young, probably maybe 6 or 7 years old, at his dad's church called Set Free, which was in Anaheim, California at the time. He started attending the church, and my family was already there. So that was our initial introduction to him.
Yeah, we were so young. Well, for me, I was so young. I don't really remember a formal meeting. It's just I remember him always being there.
And Lonnie, how old were you?
Well, we're 2 years apart. So
if I was 6 or 7, you were probably like 4 or 5.
Yeah.
And what are your memories of Geronimo's dad?
Well, his dad's name is Phil. So we knew him as Pastor Phil, and he was very kind of like what you would call maybe a celebrity type pastor. We felt very like, kind of in one sense, kind of just like in awe whenever we were around him. He was like a biker and kind of intimidating looking with tattoos, and he rode a Harley Davidson, and he was definitely
as a child,
revered.
Yeah, as a child, I think he was quite intimidating.
And would you think that most of the adults felt the same way about him?
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
So he had a big presence.
Yes, definitely.
And then how did your relationship with his son develop?
At Set Free, it was not very intimate because Phil, his church, basically, they ran a bunch of communal homes for people who were rehabbing from drug addiction, which that's how my parents ended up there. And we lived there for maybe 5 or 6 years, something like that. I was 11 years old by the time that we left. And so I would see Geronimo at church and see him performing, because they had like a Christian rap group there and they did a lot of outreaches. But it's when our family left Set Free, the church, Phil's church, we left with his son Geronimo when I was 11.
And I was 9.
Lonnie was 9. And we moved to Riverside County with him. He lived in our house with us. And then that's really when we became much more intimately acquainted with him.
And what were the circumstances surrounding him living with your family?
I remember our parents throwing all of our stuff in trash bags in the middle of the night. And we loaded up a car and we all left together. So I guess the church was going through some things, and I don't remember those details very clearly.
Yeah, Phil had been under the eye of the community. Like, there were accusations of like sexual immorality stuff that was going on at Set Free. And as a result of that, people started leaving the church, and the church became less stable. And that, I think, ultimately is what motivated my parents to say we're leaving. And Geronimo knew that the church wasn't going to be doing well. And he also he was married at the time, but was having what we know now, an affair with a young girl. And she lived in Riverside County in Lake Elsinore. So we ended up moving, our family ended up leaving with Geronimo to Lake Elsinore. Mm-hmm. We moved into a house right down the street from where that girl lived.
Now, did your parents know about these allegations against Phil?
They did know, but they also knew that Geronimo was not happy with his wife and that he was interested in this younger girl, who I think they were 8 years apart, but she was definitely underage and he was not. And my parents were, I guess, in somewhat support of his relationship with her.
Now, was Geronimo in a pastor-like relationship at this time?
I wouldn't say pastor. I would say he was like becoming a celebrity type guy, because he had the Set Free posse and they would travel all over and do outreaches, and which consisted of these rap shows where they would take secular music and change the lyrics and perform them for people, to get them to come to their Christian shows.
So you moved, Geronimo came with you, and then what happened?
Well, we were in Lake Elsinore for a couple of years. For me, that's when my relationship with Geronimo started to get not right. We lived in a really small house, which technically it had one bedroom and then like 2 open living spaces. And me and my sister, I had at the time 3 sisters, Lonnie, Denise, and Marin. And me and Denise and Lonnie, there were like 2 full-size bed in this open space area
right off the kitchen.
Right off the kitchen where we would sleep. And so with Geronimo being there that basically led to him wanting to come in, and he would lay in one of the full-size beds with us sometimes, just casually starting to come in. And
yeah, we had 1 bathroom, so that was always a weird thing as well. We kind of had I know it sounds strange, but it was like an open door policy,
right?
Because there's 1 bathroom, you can't lock it. If anybody needs it while you're showering, you have to leave the door unlocked, kind of thing.
Yeah. So that's really pretty quickly when things started to get weird between me and Geronimo.
Mm-hmm. And how old were you, Nancy, at the time?
I was 11.
Okay. And so, Lonnie, you were 9.
I was 9.
And
yes.
at this point, nothing was happening sexually between you and Geronimo, I'm assuming.
No. I remember the women coming in and out, and I remember weird things like staying up late and sleeping in the same sleeping bag, but nothing strange happened with me at that point.
Okay.
Well, that in and of itself is strange, I think, looking back as an adult woman. But, as far as having any encounter with him sexually, that didn't happen in Lake Elsinore.
So
when did he become a minister?
I don't think he became a minister until he moved to Virginia.
To Texas, right? Was he ordained in Texas?
No.
He might have been at New Beginnings.
He was not a pastor there.
Oh, okay. Maybe not.
No, we just did the music there.
Yeah, that's right.
So he didn't, from what I remember, he was, I guess at the very end, when we were getting ready to go our separate ways, he tried starting his own church. Because actually now I remember we were meeting at the YMCA.
Yep.
But it wasn't for long. It was very short before kind of everything came out and we had to go separate ways.
And so during this period of time, you saw him as what, a family friend or a religious leader for you? What were you? How did you see him during this time?
When he lived in Lake Elsinore, I don't know how I would have perceived him other than just like kind of a cool guy who was doing Christian rap music. That's kind of really the extent of what I saw him. I didn't necessarily see him as a religious leader because he never personified that too intensely. His focus was always more on like making Christian rap music And then if he got a show, he might give an altar call or something to invite people to ask Jesus into their heart. But that wasn't the emphasis. The emphasis was the music side.
Okay. So he was doing Christian work, but he wasn't necessarily a Christian leader at this time.
Right. Yeah.
And so when did things progress, Nancy, in terms of your relationship sexually with him?
It started in Lake Elsinore, but it stopped because I got really scared at one point. He tried to kiss me at one point on the couch, and I jumped out of the couch, and I think he got really nervous. And he, maybe a few days later, tried talking to me about it, and I didn't have anything to say. I didn't say anything to him. So he backed up, but was really nice to me, really, really nice. Do you want to go get ice cream with all of us? Very inclusive, trying to be a nice guy. And I think probably in retrospect, because he was nervous that I was going to say something, but I never did. I didn't say anything to my parents. I said, at one point I had confided in another little friend. We were in Lake Elsinore for about 3 years, and he had moved to Texas after he married Samantha, and they were there for maybe about a year before my family followed him out there. And once we did, at that point I was 13, and it progressed very quickly after we got there.
People often ask me, how does it get started? How does the person talk you into it? What are you thinking? So help me understand how he actually progressed things.
Well, I think for me with Geronimo, just the circumstances of living in this church that had this celebrity type pastor, this guy with this awesome rap group and these dancers, I definitely looked at them as, wow, these are really cool people. And at 13, that hadn't changed when we got to Texas. I was definitely dealing with seeing boys and being interested in boys and that kind of thing. So when I got there, I still thought he's still cool and he's cute and that kind of thing. And I think he knew that already. Because a lot of the women, there were a lot of people who were doing things with him besides the young girls that he was with. He didn't necessarily have to talk to me about it. It was, I think, more taking advantage of hormones in a young person.
Well, and the situation as well. I mean, because when we initially moved to Texas,
he was living with us. He moved into the house with us.
Yeah. So, and he would send his wife away.
Yeah. When we first got there, he found a house for my parents, and him and his wife moved into that house. And it was maybe a couple weeks or a few weeks after we got there that he sent her back to California for a month. And that's when the sexual abuse started.
Yeah.
I mean, what you're describing to me is so typical for thinking like a 13-year-old. There's this cool guy, you've known him for a long time. He's a rapper, et cetera, et cetera. It doesn't explain to me what he's thinking. I mean, you're a child.
It's a hard part for me because at the time, even when we went through the trial and I did my whole testimony, that was the part that I felt like people did not quite get. And I was trying to be honest. I really wanted to be brutally honest about it. I didn't want to walk in there. And I didn't walk in there at the time saying I was this rape victim and feel so sorry for me. I didn't do that. I went in telling them the truth that I thought I loved this guy. And I thought this guy loved me. And a hard part for me mentally was people saying to me, no, it was abuse, Nancy. Because my parents didn't tell me it was abuse. A lot of the people, when it all came out, I took the brunt weight of the responsibility. A lot of people looked at me as, you knew better. I can't tell you how many times I heard, you knew better. He was a married man. How could you do that? But, and I felt guilty because in my head and in my heart, I thought I did love him and I thought he did love me. you know.
Now, Lonnie, how much did you know of what was going on during this time?
Well, I had my suspicions about what was going on with Nancy, but the first time that was confirmed to me was probably right directly after my first sexual encounter with Geronimo, and it was so confusing and scary for me at the time. I was about 11, 10 or 11.
11.
And yeah, so it was, I had that initial experience, which I can relate to what Nancy's saying, where, I was coming into that preteen season of wanting to be included and all of that. But I think for me, because I had known so early he was also with Nancy, and I knew he was married and all of these things, I had no idea what to do with all of that,
Now, did the two of you actually talk at all about this when it was happening?
No. No.
Mm-mm.
I didn't know about Lonnie until probably, I don't know when it started with Lonnie, but I remember when I realized was shortly before it all came out about me. And at the time we were living in Grapevine, Texas, because we'd gotten all kicked out of the other church that we were in, and because people had suspicions. But I had seen her laying in his room with him, not like under the blankets or anything like that, but on his bed next to him, and I just felt it, like I knew that was going on.
And so how did this all come out?
Lonnie.
Yeah, I told somebody. I told a family friend who
was living with us. Lindsay.
Yeah.
And what happened then?
Well, things had started to get a lot more, it went from just touching to actual intercourse. And for me at 12 years old, I felt like I was kind of going a little crazy. Like, I was scared, but I didn't want to be like excommunicated. Like, I was scared what that would look like if I said something or,
So you were scared, Lonnie, of what other church members would say or think about you, or what were you scared of?
I think more it was more my family. Like, the way things were set up too was crazy, because again, we had all been living together. So Geronimo still lived with us at this point.
And our parents were so devoted to Geronimo.
They
were so devoted to Geronimo.
My mom called him son, like my son,
and he called her mom, and my dad loved him. And and this was what our parents wanted. They wanted to do outreaches. They wanted to grow this rap group thing into something really big.
They wanted to have a church like Set Free, but they wanted to do that with Geronimo. So it was a scary thing for a lot of different reasons. I knew that he was with my sister, which was kind of created this really bizarre relationship that I had with her.
Yeah.
And then, knowing the relationship he had with my parents and everything else, I just knew that everybody was going to hate me for this.
Yeah, and our family was in a lot of ways very dependent on Geronimo. Mm-hmm. So like every house we lived in, he's got set up for us to live there. Like, for the most part, my dad wasn't working. The work he was doing was outreach related, which would generate enough money for, all of us to live in a communal home, get the rent paid, get some food on the table.
So you felt like, and it sounds like there legitimately was a reason to believe this, there was so much at stake.
Yeah,
definitely. And when I did finally come out, I think what I was looking for initially was just somebody to talk to about it. because I couldn't talk to Nancy. I couldn't talk to my parents. I wasn't going to school really. It was very sporadic that I was going to school. I had like no friends. So I think initially my intention wasn't,
for him to get in trouble.
yeah. But, you know, at the same time, I was scared, you know?
So you told a family member, and what was this family member's reaction?
Well, this was a friend of the family.
Okay.
And she was probably about like 16 or 17 at the
She was
time.
16.
16. And when I told her, I think she became angry, like immediately.
Yeah, she did.
And
With you?
no, she was not angry with me, but I was surprised at her reaction. Like it wasn't something I had anticipated. And then she started questioning me about it a little bit. And I remember, I don't remember a whole lot past that. Just, I think I kind of probably clammed up a bit, but yeah, she became angry, and she
went to her parents and she went to our parents about
right
it.
away.
Right away. Like immediately.
So she was angry that this had happened, it sounds
Yeah.
like.
Mm-hmm.
You, Lonnie, were expecting her to what? Not to be so upset about it, or to help you just talk it through, or you just weren't sure?
I wasn't sure, but I was kind of just thinking she was going to listen to me, and I don't know, I mean, in my 12-year-old brain, I don't know that I really thought it all through that much. It was more just I want to talk to somebody about this. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because, what kind of comes across to me is the fact that there are so many confusing parts of this. I mean, you've lived with this person for years. Your parents have been involved with him financially and emotionally. I can see how that would be incredibly confusing.
Yes, it was, to say the least.
And so how did your parents react?
Oh,
Well,
it was kind of weird. They were angry, but it felt almost as if they were more upset
angry
at
at
me.
us.
Yeah. Yeah. It did.
They did, though, they asked Geronimo about it. My dad knew at that point that he had to tell Geronimo to leave. I don't know exactly what conversations my parents had with Lonnie, but I remember my mom, I was in the bathroom at the time. My mom came in and asked me, is this happening with you too? And I immediately said, no, I totally lied about it. But I remember Geronimo, well, no, they told him he needed to leave, but he did not leave right away. Like he asked if he could apologize to both of us in his bedroom. And my parents let him speak to us individually, privately in his bedroom. And to me, he was just crying. He was crying and sobbing, saying he was so sorry, that he needed me to forgive him, and that he loved me and he still wanted to be with me. And it was crazy. It was absolutely crazy.
And for me, he was crying, but he was asking things like, what did you say? What, how much did you tell them, kind of thing.
And so I'm assuming Geronimo left.
No, he did not leave. They did not have him leave right away. Samantha, I think, left before he did.
Mm-hmm. And then they sent us away for a little while to stay with.
Like a couple days, because the CPS was called. There was questioning going on there. And we all were, or they took Lonnie for the questioning because she was the one who said it happened and she didn't deny it. So they took Lonnie to be questioned, and what happened?
At that point, I think I did deny it when they took me in. But it's great. The weird thing is, like, I don't remember the questioning. I remember the ride there. I remember being in the car driving there, but I don't actually remember what I said when I spoke to them. I know that it happened.
Well, and we were at the time so terrified that the CPS had been called, because for me, I remember when we were right before, what brought us to Set Free was that my mom was a drug addict, and she lost us to the state. So we were living in foster care. And I just thought, oh my gosh, what if we tell them what's been happening in this house?
And they take us away
out of the house and put us back in foster care.
Mm-hmm.
And that was even greater motivation to not say anything.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Foster care can be really difficult. And I think it's so unfortunate that so much of the time when children are taken away, they're the ones who feel punished.
Yeah.
Because they're the ones who are having to leave.
Right. Exactly.
So how did things wind up in court?
Oh, man. That's like years later.
Yeah, we thought we dodged a bullet back then, I think, in our heads as far as it being reported. Anyways, in my head, I would say that because we kind of just moved on.
When you say moved on, I mean, what does that mean? In terms of your relationship with your parents, your relationship with each other?
Right. No, it was bad. It was very messy. My parents were very angry. Geronimo moved out, but eventually I confided in my mom about what was going on with Geronimo. And so she actually allowed me to keep seeing him. Like, my dad had to go get a job. He got a job at doing construction. And Geronimo would, when he was gone, would still come and he would pick me up and still spend time with me. And that went on till I was 15.
So when you say spend time with you, in a sexual way?
Yes. So she knew what was going on. She said, I believe you love him. You know, he can come get you today or whatever, you know, for a couple hours. And he would come pick me up. And so, like, while this is going on, there's other people involved. There's other people who see it, who are there. And a lot of these people who were there for that part of my relationship with Geronimo were people who testified in court.
So it was pretty out in the open, it sounds like, for a while.
In some way. My dad didn't know, but there were a few people who did know and saw things and were suspicious of things. And why is that? Like, even my neighbor. My neighbor was one of the people who testified at court in Grapevine, who saw him coming and things happening between us.
And Lonnie, are you continuing to have a relationship with Geronimo, or is that over?
No, that was completely over. I knew he was still coming around. My mom would make it a point to try to send me away.
Right.
But you know, I knew what was going on. So it was very weird.
Yeah. So it's that stuff's going on, and then eventually Geronimo moves to Virginia. And that's when, like, the real break happened. And that at that point, I would say, at least for me, that's when I was like, I'm just going to try to deal with my life.
And then we found out about the other girl in Virginia.
So there was a man who knew that there were things going on with a young underage girl at Geronimo's new church in Richmond, Virginia. And he wanted us to speak to this girl, which I didn't want to do. The case got forwarded to Texas and nothing happened. And that was hard for us to kind of relive and re-talk through all that. So we were like, we're never doing that again. That was a nightmare.
Was miserable.
So, okay, let me just back up a little bit just to make sure I understand. So at 15, when you're 15, and Lonnie, you must be 13, that's when Geronimo moves to Virginia.
Yeah, I was probably 15 when he moved there.
I think 15? That's about right. Mm-hmm.
And during this period of time, Nancy, your relationship, or the abuse, let's call it what it is, the abuse has continued. And your mom has kind of collaborated in that because she believes that you love him and vice versa, even though he's married. And how old is he at this time?
He's 13 years older than me. So I'm 15. He's 28.
Okay. And so what prompted his decision, if you know, to move to Virginia?
I think there was so much controversy surrounding him in Fort Worth because he'd been there for 2 or 3 years building his In for Life ministry. That was the name of the rap group, the New Christian Rap Group. And there was too much controversy surrounding him.
Like, well, I think you hit it on the head when you said it was kind of open. Like, a lot of people knew about the falling out of our family. And I think he started to get the, reputation in Fort Worth as being
within the Christian community.
Yeah.
Because that's really the only places that we were. But we went to a lot of churches. He was and somewhat attached to like Kenneth Copeland, who's a big ministry out there. It's a big city, but it's a small Christian knit community. So word spreads fast.
And so during this period of time, what is the relationship like between the two of you?
It's terrible.
Awful.
Yeah. Because I thought Geronimo loved me and I thought I was in a relationship with him, I was so angry at Lonnie. I blamed her. Like, I was mad at her. Why are you in my head? I was thinking, why are you trying to take him from me? And she didn't care for me much.
No,
we did not.
No, the
feelings felt very mutual toward each other.
Yeah, it was really frustrating because, on one hand, I want a sister who's, there for me, but she's feeling betrayed. And then I'm angry. And I don't, I'm angry at her for everything, and I think a big part of me was jealous as to like, well, why is it everything's okay for Nancy? And here I am, my parents, I felt at the time hated me because I was the dumb one who blew the whistle, and ruined everybody's life. I ruined Nancy's relationship. I ruined my parents' opportunity to do ministry. And so, yeah, I was angry at everybody. And I think everyone was angry at me.
Lonnie, did you always recognize it as abuse?
I always knew it was wrong. I was always really confused and frustrated in that sense where there were times where I wanted the attention. I wanted, to be on the inside of the circle. But I always knew it was wrong. So I think for me, I didn't struggle with that the way Nancy did, where she felt more guilty. I felt more angry, I think.
And Nancy, when did you start seeing it differently? That it wasn't this mutual relationship between two adult people. It was really an abusive situation.
I think I started to really understand that when we started going through with the trial. So not long ago. I mean, it took me a lot of praying and a lot of talking to my husband, and that because I would just keep saying I would use the word my relationship with Geronimo, and I did that all throughout the trial. I probably still do it now. That's how I viewed it, and that's how I felt I was held to that standard and held accountable as an adult by everybody around me, including my dad, including my friends and my peers, and a lot of people made me feel that way. And it wasn't until we went to the trial and as the years of leading up to the trial, really, that I think my mind started to start thinking about it differently.
Yeah, I think we both carried a lot of guilt, and in retrospect, I think it was imposed upon us that way. Because as an adult and as a parent now, I couldn't imagine if my child came to me expressing something like this had happened to them, that I don't care who it was, I don't think I would have that. I couldn't see myself having that reaction.
But you know what? It was, I really do think that it wasn't until he had to be held accountable.
Yeah.
that all of a sudden it like started to register in my mind. Like, this is such a big deal. And watching it all lead up and unfold, and the implications and the consequences and how everybody was being affected, the big deal that it actually was, really helped me to believe that he did a bad thing. Like, look at the consequences. He's now being held accountable. I've been held accountable at 13, 14, 15. I've listened to everybody talk terribly about me. And now all of a sudden you're caught. And everybody's saying you shouldn't have done that. And these are the consequences. And it was like, that really aided in my accepting it as abuse. Yeah, exactly.
Did anybody support you during this time?
I had, the girl Lindsay who told my parents, her family, they were so sweet. Mm-hmm. And they actually showed up to the courtroom. It's like, it makes me want to cry. So, her dad was so sweet to me, and he was really good. Like, he supported us. He supported us girls. He would say, like, he shouldn't have done that. That was wrong, what he did. And he was sad about it. Like, he was sad that it happened. He was sad for us. And that was not what we were used to. And even when he came to the trial, like, I was sitting in the stand and I saw him, I was like, oh my gosh, like, Lindsay's dad. I can't believe him. He was there with his wife, with Deborah. And it was crazy because he came up to me afterward and reminded me of the time that he sat me down on the bench with Lindsay at the park and said, this wasn't your fault. And he's like, I'm just so happy that you finally can see that and that you're getting some justice,
And what gave both of you the courage to testify and to follow through with this? Because I wish I could say that the two of you are the first victims of somebody in a religious position. But you're not. Unfortunately, you're not. And yet I know how difficult it can be to come forward, period. And then when there's all these other layers on top of it, there's somebody who's supposed to be respected in the community and a leader and a Christian, et cetera, how difficult it can be.
Yeah. There were times where I think we looked at each other and talked about, do we have to do this? Like, and I think we even asked Weber at one point, like, do we have to? Can we choose just not to move forward? Can we just not do this? Like, we want to be done with it. But I think really it comes down to the grace of God. Like, God, he is sufficient. And I think he just gave us the strength and the courage that we needed to do what was right, and to know that even though it was scary.
How have the two of you managed to keep such a strong faith in light of the fact that the person who was your perpetrator wore this religious kind of guise in a way?
Don't get me wrong. I had a time where I said, I'm not a Christian. Like, this is full of nothing but crazy people. And I really believed that, and I stepped away. But I think what brought me back was realizing that the church is full of a bunch of broken people. And if my faith is contingent upon any man or pastor, then it's not faith in God, it's faith in that person. So it's looking to Christ and Christ alone, and not to man, not knowing that there are also wolves in sheep's clothing. And that's what Geronimo was. He was not a man of faith. And so thank God that we didn't turn from Christ, because he just was deceiving people and hurting people.
What would be, I guess, the most important thing you would want somebody listening today to take away from your story?
For me, it's that you are a victim. that they want you to think that you're the perpetrator, and maybe even sometimes your family or whoever's involved, and they know they're guilty, so they want to aid in this whole, like, you're not a victim. You are one. Like, it is abuse. You are the victim and they are the perpetrator. And so say it. Like, there's real freedom. It's so liberating. Even saying it now is that we were victims of a crime by a man who professed that he loved Jesus and was hurting a lot of women, not just us, but a lot of young women, older women, using his status to do that.
Lonnie, anything to add?
I would say it's never too late to do what's right, because I think for me, for a long time, especially when this first started coming out, I just thought, well, I knew, I understood it's a crime and he should pay, but it's too late. It's too late. So just knowing that, no matter what the statute of limitations is, like, it's never too late to speak up and to do what's right, because you don't know who's going to be saved from future abuse.
Well, I just want to thank both of you so much for your courage going through the trial and just for coming on today and talking about your experience. And I'm just kind of in awe and admiration at the story that you've shared, and just the fact that your faith seems to be so strong and that your relationship between the two of you seems to have really healed.
Yeah, it has. Yeah. We're thankful. we're very close now, and we're like, we say that's by God's grace, because if anybody knew us 15 years ago, you would never have guessed it.
It's true.
So now you're regular sisters again, huh?
Yes, it's so nice. It's such a blessing. We like to get coffee together. We just like being in each other's presence, and it's awesome. We're really grateful.
Well, thank you. Really, I'm so mean that. It was such a moving story that you shared. And again, I have so much respect. You were talking at the end about acknowledging that you're victims, but you're also victors, really.
Yes,
and
I love that.
That's something to really wrap your arms around and kind of hold close, because you've earned it for sure.
Thank you so much, Joni. That's very kind. And thank you for speaking with us and allowing us to share with you. We hope that going through hard things like this, that God uses it in some way, for good.
Well, I definitely think that you have made a huge impact in so many ways. And I think, when both of you were talking at the end about the fact that you don't know who else is going to suffer, I've seen that so many times, and I completely understand anybody not wanting to go through a trial or testifying. I have no judgment whatsoever. At the same time, there are so many perpetrators who do it again and again. And sometimes it does take somebody to kind of say, I'm going to be that one